My specialty is sort of Middle East and Central Asia and the Caucasus. And I look at, in particular, three strands. One is Al-Qaeda, the other one is Afghanistan, the other one is Chechnya. My talk, titled The Ghost Armies, looking for these Chechen soldiers in Afghanistan, focuses on one of the greatest myths, I believe, of the war on terror. And that is this concept of this paradigm or this myth that thousands of Chechens have left their homeland, left the Caucasus, and traveled across Eurasia to Afghanistan to fight U.S. troops. If you go on Google and look on Google and type in Chechens Afghanistan, you'll get, last time I checked, almost 200,000 hits. So this is a very, very well-known myth that Chechens are leading the vanguard. They're in charge of leading the attacks against U.S. troops in Afghanistan. So I apologize for this slide right here. You guys might want to sit up here for this talk. How you see the slides. No point having you comment on these things without seeing the visual evidence. And I'll certainly do the same when you guys speak. But certainly the slides bring this story to life. I apologize for this slide right here. This is a slide of Arab fighters, Arab volunteer fighters in Afghanistan. There are no images of Chechens in Afghanistan. That's why I had to use this slide. We'll see why there are no images of Chechens in Afghanistan as we proceed. Now, to understand this issue, we have to go back in time and supply something that's missing in this discussion of these elusive Chechen specters in Afghanistan, and that is context. The context of the Chechens is, of course, the Soviet Union. The Chechens had an ethnic republic in the Northern Caucasus known as the Chechen Ingush ASSR. Here it is right here, the Chechen Ingush ASSR, Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic. And this explains who they are. Chechens were subjects of the Soviet Union from 1917 until 1991, and this tremendously shaped their identity. I call Chechens an example of Homo Sovieticus, Soviet man, much more so than Homo Islamicus. Remember, under Soviet rule, the Chechens lost the Arabic alphabet. By the time the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, there's only 2 functioning mosques in Chechnya, and they're very Sovietized on many levels. This is a picture of downtown Grozny as it was during the Soviet epoch, a typical Soviet town. Khrushchev era or Stalin era, concrete buildings, Soviet Ladas and Moscovich cars. Another picture of downtown Grozny as it was in the 70s with Soviet propaganda, KP, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union here. During this time period, Chechens were probably more inclined to be able to quote Karl Marx than the Prophet Muhammad. Very Sovietized. Most Chechens were members of the Young Pioneers or the Komsomol, Young Communist Youth League. This paradigm explains the Chechens more than, say, Wahhabi Islam of the sort you found in Saudi Arabia. 2 completely different paradigms. There's Lenin Square in downtown Grozny. And by the way, I'm not sure how well you guys know the various commanders who fought in the Chechen War against Russia, but several of them were actually members of the Komsomol, or the Communist Party, including Salman Odiyev. This is a member of the Chechen resistance who fought against the Russians, grew a long beard, but before that he was a member of Komsomol. Aslan Mashkadov, the second president of Chechnya, was a colonel in the Soviet army, artillery colonel. I call these Chechens Homo Sovieticus or Sovetski Человек, Soviet man. This is the world they grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s. The generation that would later fight against the Russians for independence when the Soviet Union collapsed December 25th, 1991. Now, speaking about Chechens in Afghanistan, there is some proof of Chechens having been in Afghanistan, but it was in the ranks of the Red Army. The Soviet Union, of course, invaded Afghanistan December 25th, 1979, and Chechens fought heroically in the ranks of the Communist Army in Afghanistan during that 9-year occupation. We have accounts of the Chechens fighting in Afghanistan. They fought bravely for communism, for the Soviet system, as they did, ironically enough, during World War II. A group of Chechens, 600 Chechens were killed fighting in Brest during the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union during World War II. So this is another paradigm. Chechens have been in Afghanistan, we have proof of it, but only in the ranks of the Soviet army, not waging jihad. And I'm trying to put daylight here between the Chechens on one hand and jihadists like Al-Qaeda and the Taliban on the other hand. Which brings us to this paradigm here. Osama bin Laden, of course, represents Al-Qaeda. He's a Wahhabi or Salafite, a strict fundamentalist from Saudi Arabia. During the 1980s, the Chechens, ironically enough, fought against bin Laden. In fact, they had a general named Dzhokhar Dudayev who led the Soviet Air Force fighting in eastern Afghanistan. He flew Sukhoi and MiG jets in eastern Afghanistan. The irony here is that Dudayev, who becomes president of the very first breakaway Republic of Chechnya, fought against the jihad in Afghanistan in the 80s. I love this picture of him on the right here. Dudayev was once interviewed. He became the first president of Chechnya, having previously been an Air Force general in the Soviet Air Force. And he was interviewed in 1991 about Islam. What is the role of Islam in the new breakaway Republic of Chechnya? And Dudayev says it's very important. All Muslims should pray 4 times a day. He didn't know Muslims were supposed to pray 5 times a day. He had so little knowledge of Islam, he thought Muslims pray 4 times a day. So this is a man who was not Homo Islamicus. In fact, he married a Soviet Jew. Hardcore Muslim fundamentalist terrorists don't marry Jews. Oh, of course, he created a secular state. The new secular state, founded by the Chechens, by Dudayev, had its constitution based on the Estonian constitution. The Chechens wanted the same thing as Ukraine got, or Estonia, or Armenia, Azerbaijan, a secular independent state, a democratic state. The Chechens did not want a Sharia Islamic law state. That is not why the Chechens fought for independence from 1994 to 1996 against the Russian Federation. It was not a jihad. It was a secular secessionist struggle. Here's some Chechen Highlanders, including Ramazan Kadyrov, wearing their Chechen costumes there. Now let's discuss Chechen Islam. Chechen Islam is of the Sufi variant, the mystic variant. They have 2 major Sufi orders, Naqshbandi and the Qadiriya. This form of Islam is not recognized as a form of Islam by strict fundamentalists in Saudi Arabia, like bin Laden. They worship at local shrines. Many of their customs are pre-Islamic, a very mystical form of Islam, the exact opposite of the strict Wahhabi form of Islam you find today in Saudi Arabia. That's the sight you don't find in Saudi Arabia these days. Women walking around with machine guns. These are Chechen women. Compare these women, unveiled, not wearing hijabs or burqas, carrying AK-47s proudly to defend their country. Compare this Chechen image with this image from Saudi Arabia. All Muslims are not the same. The nuances are key here. Nuances are very important. That is not the same paradigm we have in Chechnya when it comes to Sufi Islam. Now, you probably know the story. Teeny Chechnya, which is smaller than Vermont, fought Russia. Less than 1 million people in Chechnya, 140 million people in Russia, and against all odds, Chechnya beat Russia during the First War of 1994 to 1996. A real David versus Goliath struggle. But it wasn't a jihad. It was never called a jihad. It was a war for independence of the sort that Estonia got, or Ukraine. Here's Salman Raduyev, one of the top Chechen commanders, who was formerly a member of Komsomol, a man who knew Marx and Lenin's sayings very well. Now, as I'm sure you know also, this teeny state had chaos for 3 or 4 years, and then Russia reinvaded in October of 1999. The so-called Second Russo-Chechen War, which ended in 2009. During this war, the Russians were accused of all sorts of war crimes, killing thousands of people in these filtration camps, night raids, etc. Human rights groups like Amnesty International condemned them for these war crimes. These are bodies of Chechens that have been shot and killed and thrown in dishes. And not surprisingly, the US condemned them, especially George Bush. George Bush and his whole Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell, many members of the right-wing Republican Congress, Jesse Helms, McCain, all of them criticized Russia at the time for war crimes in Chechnya. In fact, President Bush came out calling for Russia to be kicked out of the G8 for war crimes against the Chechens. That was the stance of the Republicans, the Republican administration, in the White House prior to 9/11. Clearly this was a war in which Russians were seen as the bad guys and Chechens were the victims before 9/11. Now 9/11 changes everything. It was an awakening moment for America, for the Bush administration, which was elected as domestic platform. Suddenly, you have the whole world seen through the lenses of the so-called war on terror. Now, Muslims with weapons look differently. Any Muslim, whether it be Palestinians or Bosnians, Kosovo Albanians, Kashmiris, suddenly Muslims with weapons aren't as trusted as they were before. They might have links to Al-Qaeda, the Beit Noir, the black enemy of America. Anything that had any possible hint linked to Al-Qaeda was seen now as the enemy in the new scheme of things after 9/11. And at this time, we start getting statements from people like Colin Powell, like this one here. Complete shift of paradigm. In fact, Colin Powell called upon the Chechens to break links to Al-Qaeda. The Chechen president said, no problem, we don't have any. Remember, we're Sufi, we're Sovietized, we're secular. It's a different thing entirely to bin Laden, Wahhabi Al-Qaeda. Of course, you know the story then, we invade Afghanistan, Operation Enduring Freedom, October 2001. At this time period, the Russian media begins reporting that Chechens are fighting in Afghanistan against US troops. Once again, after class, after this is over, go to Google and type in Chechens Afghanistan. You're going to be overwhelmed with hits. It's conventional wisdom. Chechens are there. Chechens are the vanguard of Al-Qaeda's army, the 055 Brigade, fighting against US troops in defense of the Taliban. Now this came as a shock to three groups of experts. Caucasian experts, the Caucasus Mountains, Al-Qaeda experts, and Afghan experts. All three groups had never heard of Chechens from distant Chechnya fighting in Afghanistan on behalf of Mullah Omar's Taliban. There was no record of this, but Russian media reported as fact. Hundreds of Chechens fighting in Kandahar in the south, hundreds of Chechens in Kunduz, hundreds of Chechens in Mazar-Sharif. One report from the Russian media said 60 Chechens committed suicide by jumping in the Amudarya River rather than surrender to US troops. Over and over again, I did the math. By the time it was over, I had over 2,000 Chechens fighting in Afghanistan based upon Russian media accounts, which were uncritically swallowed by the American media and aped and copied. Once again, look at the logistics here. You know, how do you escape Russian-occupied Chechnya? If you don't know what's going on in Chechnya at this time period, by this time period, teeny Vermont-sized Chechnya has been conquered by the Russians. There's over 110,000 Russian troops in this small republic. How did the Chechens break away from the republic? And by the way, at their max, there are only about 4,000 Chechen fighters, usually about 3,000. How did this small army of Chechens escape Russia, travel across Eurasia with the weapons, and go to Afghanistan to fight on behalf of a distant regime they have nothing in common with? Remember, the Taliban created a time warp, a medieval time warp, a religious prison camp. Taliban shoot women for adultery, i.e. walking on the streets without a burqa on. Chechens are completely different. We'll get to that issue in a second here. Once again, look at that journey. How did the Chechens escape that small republic up there and travel through Central Asia, Russian-controlled Central Asia and the backyard of Central Asia, Russia, into Afghanistan, or through Iran, which is Shiite? Most accounts overlook the logistic issues involved. How does this small Chechen army redeploy, and why would it counterintuitively leave its own homeland to fight America? I mean, who takes on NATO and Russia at the same time with a small army of 3,000 fighters? But no one's asking these commonsensical questions at the time. Over and over again, American media accounts spoke of Chechens being in the vanguard in Afghanistan, fighting and killing US troops during Operation Enduring Freedom. Once again, Chechens are down here in the Vedno Gorge and Argun Gorge, two gorges in the south. They're trapped. They're hiding in the forest. How do they redeploy, and why? There's so few of them. And by this time, by 2001, there's only about 1,000 left. Well, this Taliban army has 55,000 men. They don't need a couple thousand Chechens. It's a big army with tanks. Contrary to common opinion, the Taliban had a large army of tanks, massive artillery. They had MiGs. They had Air Force. What do they need a couple Chechens, 1,000 Chechens for? And why would they do this? Remember, Chechens, remember that paradigm. They're Sufis. They're Sovietized. They have their own homeland. Why would they travel to Afghanistan to defend these guys who are whipping women and shooting women and constructing a medieval time warp that has nothing to do with the Chechens' objectives? By the way, the Taliban are ethnic Pashtuns. All Muslims are not the same. Ethnic Pashtuns are conservative, tribal Aryans from southeastern Afghanistan. Chechens are pre-Aryan, Sovietized Sufi Muslims. That's what I'm missing there, but still, this paradigm dominates. That Chechens are there. That they're fighting Afghanistan, fighting against us. They're the vanguard. The media is full of reports of Chechens there, these elusive Chechen specters, these ghosts. I was so curious about this myth, I traveled there myself several times. I spent 4 summers in Afghanistan, the first 2 looking for Chechens. One of my colleagues called me a weirdo, looking for the Yeti, the Chechen Yeti, or the Bigfoot, in Afghanistan. But off I went. I flew to Kabul, got a convoy of Uzbeks. Uzbeks they're Mongols, and they're pro-American. They fought for us against the Taliban in Operation Enduring Freedom. So off we went. We traveled over the Hindu Kush Mountains, and we got to the north. where thousands of Taliban were still being held as captives. What was my objective? To meet these Taliban and ask them, did you fight side to side, arm to arm with any Chechens? I want to know, were any Chechens amongst your army? Because there were foreigners in Afghanistan. There were Pakistanis, there were Arabs, of course, Al-Qaeda Arabs, of course, and Uyghurs from Indochina. And lastly, Uzbekistanis, Uzbeks from Uzbekistan. Foreigners were fighting for Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. I want to know, were there any Chechens amongst them? So here I am with the head of the Northern Alliance in the north, General Dostum on the left here. This is the man who led horse-mounted cavalry charges against the Taliban in 2001. I just published a book about him, shameless self-promotion, called The Last Warlord. So I lived with him for 2 summers, and I asked him, General, can I visit your Taliban prisoners of war? He had about 5,000 of them personally. He had 5,000 prisoners in a medieval fortress outside his home. And I said, can I visit them and interrogate them, interview them, whatever, and ask them, have they seen any Chechens? He said, sure, go ahead, my pleasure. So I went into his massive, giant prison, and I interviewed prisoners for weeks. This says Pakistan block behind me. Those are real-life foreigners in Afghanistan. I touched them. I talked to them for weeks. There's evidence there. Those are Pakistani foreign fighters in Afghanistan. A whole block of them, over 2,000 Pakistanis. They're there. Not one of them had ever seen a Chechen. None. They'd all heard about the American Taliban. You heard of the American Taliban? John Walker Lynn? He's famous. But none of them ever heard of a Chechen. Real life, you can see them. They're tangible. Proof. They're not ghosts like the Chechens. None ever heard of. These are all Pakistani. These are Afghans I interviewed. I'd never heard of a Chechen. Even though the Russian media said hundreds upon hundreds are fighting there and dying everywhere. They're in the vanguard of the armies. The actual members of that army had not heard of any Chechens. In fact, General Dostum, the guy who captured them, said, listen, we didn't find any Chechens. We have no Chechens. They don't exist. So then I went to another ethnic group to the east of the Uzbeks, the Tajiks. These are Persians. I asked them, did you have any Chechens in your prisons? They said, no. We had lots of Pakistanis, Arabs, Uyghurs, Uzbekistanis, no Chechens. Is me in the Panjshir Valley there? So then I asked Professor Danila's friend here, Ilyas Akhmatov. He was a Chechen foreign minister. He actually lives in this area. Well, he used to live in this area. I said, Ambassador Akhmatov, did the Chechen government redeploy desperately needed troops from those 2 gorges in the south across Eurasia to defend the Taliban? And he laughed at it. His response was, last time I checked, we don't have the Chechen airlines. In fact, our airport got bought off the map. And why would we do that? He was very sarcastic about the idea. It doesn't make any sense to him. So then I went to Guantanamo Bay. I was down there defending someone in a trial down there. And while I was down there, I asked the staff, did you ever have any Chechens here? Not one. No Chechens were ever apprehended by U.S. troops in Afghanistan during Operation Enduring Freedom. None. But there were Arabs, hundreds of them, thousands of Pakistanis, 3 Russians, they're actually Tatars and 1 Kabardinian, 5 Brits, real-life Brits, 9 Uyghurs, and 1 American captured right here, John Walker Lynn from California, fighting for the Taliban. So we have Americans there, but no Chechens. But still, the myth prevails. If you're in Afghanistan, you ask U.S. troops, who are the toughest, hardest enemies you ever come against? Oh, the Chechens. That Chechen sniper was unbelievable. Oh, we survived a battle with Chechens. Chechens. I asked them. I myself spent some time in ISAF headquarters, International Security Assistance Force headquarters, NATO, in Afghanistan, for 2 months working in 2009. And I asked them, these people who came back from these missions, what was it like? How did you know as a Chechen? Well, we had radio intercepts. Really? Because do you speak Nokchi, the ancient language of the Chechens? And you're from Alabama? You know, who speaks Nokchi? No, you can't learn Nokchi. You have to go to Chechnya to learn Nokchi. Or no, radio intercepts. We're sure about it. And there's Chechen suicide bombers, the Black Widows, women. One of those prevailing myths of the war on terror. No Chechen has ever been captured, interrogated, no passports ever seen, no Chechens at Bagram Air Base, no Chechens at the prison at Kandahar, no Chechens at any Afghan prisons, none at Gitmo. No one's ever seen one of these elusive Chechen specters. But yet, every U.S. troop, you ask them to come out from Afghanistan, oh, the Chechens are the toughest. Chechens are there everywhere. Chechens are sniping at us, playing landmines. The Chechens are tough. To me, in my opinion, it's also a rite of passage to give some testosterone-laced account of fighting Chechens to prove you're a man. Then you move to Afghanistan and you've killed a Chechen. Although no one's ever actually seen one. But having said all this, we do have proof of Chechens fighting in one other venue. I guess this is after we're done, I'll close here. We do have proof, and lots of it, that 150 to 200 Chechens are fighting in Syria. Lots of proof. Images of Chechens being interviewed on cameras, jihad epitaphs, the guys who died fighting there. Stories of Chechens on camera. Chechens reports of them giving their tales of fighting. Foreigners who fought, including one American who fought alongside them, filmed himself alongside Chechens. There are Chechens fighting in Syria. But they're fighting for one reason. It's a fight against Russians in a sort of proxy war. Don't forget that the Russians support the regime that the rebels are fighting against. Russians support the Shiite Assad regime. That's why this small unit of Chechens are fighting in Syria. More images of Chechens. It's actual pictures. See, I can't do this for Afghanistan because there weren't any pictures of them. But I can for Syria. There's a Chechen who died fighting in Syria. I got it from his obituary online. The Chechen commander, Abu Omar al-Shishani. We have his name. I would love one name for these Yetis in Afghanistan. I have none. Anyways, thank you for your attention. I'll leave it to Nick here.